Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. I'm Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
And this is our concepts edition for the week. And we're going to be having a loose focus on lean as a company grows, how that can help aid in growth, and also just like sort of the necessary things that you need from lean to enable the growth. As I've written it down here, how it eases the pains of growth.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a strong point of comparison.
Yeah,
but I think also some of the challenges with growth and how that can be dealt with lean versus other approaches or something.
Yeah. You got us a quote?
Quote of the week: "Time is not the same as timing," from Shigeo Shingo. And in the context they were talking about it, which I thought was very interesting, is basically that like things need to happen at the right time, not just
Quickly
happen.
Yeah, right.
And it's important to distinguish whether a thing takes too long or is just not timed well.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of, gets into like just in time, right? Like making stuff that will eventually sell. Like the premise of just in time,
Right,
is that doesn't count
uh-huh.
as good just because it will eventually sell.
Yeah,
Right? You're meant to make it just in time.
yeah. I think it's easy to focus on, like we've talked about so much recently, about the operations in individuality, and like zooming out and maybe using the analogy of like an engine. Like it'd be easy if you were like solely focused on operations to be like, these valves are not going fast enough.
Right.
You're like, we need to hit more valve cycles per minute, but the engine's like, nope, only do them when they need to happen, or the whole
Right.
thing's going to go to pot.
Right.
And I think in production, it's so easy to be like, we need to make stuff. Let's make the stuff. Let's do it faster. And I think it is much more of like most production is much more of an engine type scenario where there's these many, many small operations that have to happen in a very specific sequence in order for the whole ship to run smooth.
Yeah, for sure. And so one of the things I have written down here, something that sort of jumped out to me in reading some of Goldrat's stuff. I'm reading, I think you're reading too, the Beyond the Goal. Mm-hmm. It's just I don't know if it's a series of lectures or just one long lecture.
It's a little hard to tell.
Hard to tell. And in it, he gives some examples of defining problems or defining, and he was a mathematician, so he's really...
Physicist, right?
Oh, maybe that's right.
Yeah. I think a physicist. He goes on about it quite a bit, about the differences in how physicists see the world and the rest of us see the world.
And so definitions are key. But also reading Shigeo Shingo, he really spends quite a bit of time on definitions as well. And I think it can like sort of come off as pedantic, which we've sort of touched on before. Uh-huh. But I think hearing them both do it, I think it is really important because how you define something can often drive how you solve the thing or can't solve the thing.
Sure.
So one example Shigeo gave was using cutting oil for an engraving process at a plant. So they had these big delays due to degreasing and proper cleaning, and then they had defects when it wasn't properly cleaned, and they were contemplating buying more equipment to do the cleaning in the other department where it had to be done, but this other department was responsible for it. So they were like,
right. And
then he just asked like, why is there oil in the first place? Like, and they were like, well, you need cutting oil. And so he kind of broke out, what is the, like, why do you need cutting oil?
Yeah.
And he broke it into 3 factors: lubrication, cooling, and chip evacuation.
Yeah.
And then was like, we barely have any, like, what happens if we just skip one of them, which is the lubrication? And so they just used air. Uh-huh. And actually the better chip evacuation of compressed air, it gave them longer cutting life, even though everyone
Yeah.
But everyone sort of defined, like, if you're cutting, you use cutting oil.
Right.
It wasn't like, what is the definition of cutting oil? What is it doing?
I think it seems to be that part of that, like, extreme focus on definition is breaking preconceptions.
Yeah, right. It's sort of like a tool to drill into exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And then so you can kind of see it
Instead
of just sticking with the surface level.
Right. We all arrive to these scenarios with our own set of preconceptions and predefined definitions of what general words and the kind of the common lexicon means.
Right. And we don't, so someone uses a word and we all know what it means, but no one's sort of explicitly saying, what exactly do you mean by that?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, like, anybody who grew up outside of machining, for example, like, assumes you use literally cutting oil or just oil every time you cut metal.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's always been an interesting thing when people come and visit my shop. And for what, you know, whether it's like at the Bridgeport doing a manual operation, questioning why I'm not using cutting oil.
Oh, interesting.
Or, you know, in the big machines, you know,
like, that's so much liquid.
Yeah,
I get that all the time.
And you're like, what does that even do? And it's like, well, it actually does 3 different things. And, you know, sometimes it's doing one more than the other. And,
right.
But sort of like going back to just like the common conception outside of the trade is that when you cut steel, you use oil. Like, everybody just assumes, and there is no. And so I think anybody who enters the trade probably starts with that preconception and predefinition.
Or you just learn it and you use cutting oil because otherwise the blade gets dull and then you're like, all right, cutting, use cutting oil.
Right.
I forget if we mentioned this last week or I was talking to someone else about this. Shigeo also gives an example of foaming in a process. I think we did talk about it, and they defined it as like, what is a bubble? And it's like, there's air and there's also a film, and you can deal with the air or you can deal with the film. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and then Goldrat, it seems like, talks, like, his whole thing about differences in how physicists see the world and everyone else sees the world is that physicists fundamentally see the world as extremely simple. And boiling down to very, very, very simple concepts that have wide-reaching, what's the word? Like, just effects. Yeah. And figuring out exactly what that simple thing is the challenge. But it's all about defining that question extremely detailed to the point where you can find the simple root cause. It's similar. It's like a little different, but similar sort of effect at the end of the day.
I thought in that book so there's this idea, I think it's Goodhart's principle, where a metric becomes a bad metric. The second a metric becomes a metric, it becomes a bad metric. Right. So, like, the second you start measuring someone on a particular metric that seems like a good indicator of performance, they start shifting their activities toward that metric, and then it doesn't actually measure the thing you thought it would.
It's kind of like how in physics in general, like, the idea that you can't measure anything without affecting the system.
Right. Yeah, the electron. So, like, a couple of good examples in academia, they started measuring how many papers your work was cited on as a measure of your influence in your field. Yeah. But then the second everyone knew that's what's happening, everyone's just sort of like citing each other, and then it's not a great measure. Similarly, in operations, when you start measuring a plant based on uptime, right, everyone's like, oh, they really want our machines to be running. Right. Okay, we'll keep them running, and then, or making parts, right? Yeah. And then it's like, the warehouse guys, that's their problem. The fact that we're making tons of stuff that we don't need for the next 6 months. That's not my problem. You know, I'm going to get a great score. And he sort of talks a lot about that, about how we set up measurements in our companies really has a serious effect on what people end up doing. And I think a lot about that in like now that we're sort of growing the team, it's like even like little comments you make does communicate your priorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are very attuned to you as the boss and your priorities. Yeah.
Agreed.
And it's really important to get them right so that you're not incentivizing like, you know, I had a boss who loved if he got an email earlier in the morning from
you
you.
mentioned that.
And it's like, that's so dumb. Yeah. I also feel like a lot of, we should probably move on here, but a lot of bad management comes from from difficulty finding useful real metrics, or a desire to have metrics overriding sort of like, I don't know if it's quite common sense, but it's sort of like you want this simple indicator of like,
right.
Is someone doing their job? Because trust is hard, because real oversight is hard.
Yeah.
Because measuring progress in a project that is loosely or poorly or not at all defined is hard.
Yeah, all of it. It's like this big messy soup and you're trying to pull something out of it.
Yeah, so then it's just like, do I have an email from you early in the morning?
You're reaching for straws,
Done.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of last point on that, I think Goldrat, his like emphasis on the throughput accounting method seems to be kind of a very cool workaround for that. Because like all other metrics are subservient, everything else is subservient effectively.
Right.
To that, it's like, did you ship more saleable product? Did you make more money on it? And are you are you holding less inventory? And what's the third leg of the throughput accounting?
I'm not remembering. I just remember him basically. It came down to part days, right? It's like, did you do things doing things that should have been done but weren't, or doing things that shouldn't have been done but were?
Yeah.
And
there's that, but the throughput accounting method was even, kind of easier to wrap your head around. But basically it was like, are you shipping more saleable? Are you selling more stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Are you holding less inventory? And God, I can't believe I can't remember the third one. It's another very like simple, straightforward, easy to understand concept. And if you use that as sort of your guiding metric, those are things that are fairly easy to measure. Yeah. It can be like, oh, well, no, we're going backwards on this one. So everything else kind of has to, regardless of what your uptime looks like, regardless of what your like,
and that's the key, because the
like.
easiest metrics to find, like we've talked about on this, like you found that page on your Speedio and it's like, oh, wow, we're only up 50% of the time. And that is a really useful metric, but only to give you a sense of direction. But if you start talking about that metric with your employees, like pretty soon they're going to keep that machine running more. Right. They'll be like, well, maybe we'll run another warm-up cycle, or maybe we'll,
Which we did talk about it, but sort of as definitely just as like an indicator, not as like we need to push this number. Right. It's more like, why is this happening?
I think it's the same with time in processes. Like I think a lot of companies, it's sort of like, how long does it take you to assemble one product, right? Yeah. And then we'll measure that on your station, and that's how long it should take. And now if you fall below that, that is because you are a bad employee or a lazy employee, or need more training, or need a punishment, instead of like, that is an indicator that we have a problem in our system and we can all work together to fix that. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So pick your metrics carefully, I guess. And make sure everyone's kind of pushing in the right direction, not just the easy direction. Yeah. Or something. We had a funny, you and I went on a ride this weekend. And as part of the ride, we had to...
It was an alley cat scavenger hunt.
Yeah. / raising money for like mutual aid. Yes. And so we had to make some care packages in the process. It was just like bottles of water and like a toothbrush and granola bars. Yeah. And we both, we were with a bigger group, and we were like, oh, let's single piece flow this puppy.
We were like, this is prime for some single piece flow.
Yeah. And so we sat down.
For more clarification, it was like bags at one end, a line of a bunch of, it was a, assembly line basically.
A bunch of boxes.
Yeah.
The people running the station to assemble these they then listed out the number of each item, but it was hard to remember. Like, there were clearly so many improvements to be made, like writing that number on the box of items.
Sure.
Putting them in line so that it wasn't just like a big pile of stuff and you weren't sure if you hit them all. Yeah. Then someone picked up a bag and loaded the water in first, and I was like, well, maybe we should do that at the end because it's heavy, and so then we have maximum transportation on like the heaviest thing. But we probably did this for, I don't know, 2 minutes. It was a total mess, and then everyone was sort of like, this seems more complicated than just like each person grabbing a bag and doing their own.
Yeah. And
so we all reverted to that. And I thought it was really notable because I think most of the people in our group walked away with this, like, I don't know what these clowns were talking about, but it was clearly worse, right? Like, yeah, maybe it's theoretically a nice idea, but it's worse. And I think, like, that's a lot of lean implementations. And instead of it lasting for 3 minutes, it lasts for 3 months. But it was so clear in that moment, like, it made everything worse.
Yeah.
For sure. Like, it took us more time, and it would have required, like, okay, everyone stop. What's going wrong? What do you need from me? What am I not doing that?
Let's ask why 5 times, guys.
Yeah. And like, it clearly was a slower way to start, and it was more difficult. Everyone was more confused. It was just worse in basically every way. And I thought it was worth talking about on here because I think that is the barrier that you have to get through, essentially. It's like making sure everyone understands what the upside could be, making sure you have time to like all talk and solve each other's problems. And
it's so much of my sort of like personal experience of lean implementations prior to doing reading and starting to do stuff in our own shop was hearing, horror stories basically from other people's shops where something had been implemented from on high in management. And like pretty much the story has always been, we were making lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
They came in and they threw away all of our tools and they threw away all of our scrap. So we didn't have extra for when we needed to make a random thing. And then they left. And it's kind of like, yeah, I can see why you were just really frustrated.
Yeah.
Like now you don't have like, cause they didn't build a system, right? They was like, okay, we're going to throw away all the excess tools. Well, it turns out you don't have somebody who's like good at buying tools on time when you need them. Like you don't have a Kanban tool inventory set up.
Right.
Now you just don't have tools. And they're like, well, those were the only tools we had. Now they're in the trash. We're screwed. And
we're still being measured on how much work we put out. And no one's coming in being like, all right, well, clearly.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are great and we're having a problem. Like, let's figure it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's unfortunately extremely typical.
Yeah.
It's kind of looking at metrics again of being like, instead of being like, how do we move more stuff cost effectively through this plant or shop or whatever the situation is, they're like, oh, well, Six Sigma says things need to be clean, so we're going to throw away everything. And that...
Yeah, all clutter must be in the trash.
Yeah.
And, like, we're not going to take the time to find out, why is this here? Does anyone use it, even if it's once a year, but in a really critical fashion?
So I can see why that's frustrating.
I
just, looping back real quick, looked up Throughput Accounting, the 3 components. Throughput.
Big.
How's
that measured?
I think it's just
items shipped, kind of.
Well, I think you can measure it differently, but I think it would be a dollar quantity. It's accounting, so it would be total sold.
Total delivered
dollars
correctly.
Maybe that's an assumption.
Okay.
Yeah, that you're selling good product.
Well, I'm just thinking like someone pays us for stuff and then it takes us like sometimes 4 weeks to ship it to them. So
Sure.
just because it's cash in the door, it's like if you gave that to a salesperson and said get as much dollars in the, as many dollars in the door as possible, that
I think
Okay,
you're
so
a
there's
little bit of an aberration there, at least in the like
I feel
business to
that way
business,
sometimes.
business to business world. I think generally you're not getting paid until you at least ship something. So throughput, we're making the assumption that that's dollars sold. Inventories. So I think that would include all product that's in your facility or has been purchased. That could be raw materials.
And that's a negative.
That's a negative, yeah.
The throughput is a positive. That one's a negative.
And operating expenses.
Okay.
And those are the 3 legs.
Yeah.
And so operating expenses and inventories are obviously negative on your balance sheet, and throughput is a positive.
And if you want to learn more about this, it was sort of covered in Beyond the Goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's covered in the goal, just not like head on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole story of the book. Basically, it was changing their system from a traditional accounting to throughput accounting.
Yeah.
And, well, more importantly, changing all the things based on making their plant subservient to those goals.
Right.
But yeah, he does go into more detail in Beyond the Goal. There's some interesting things in that book as well about what he called like the throughput dollar days.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other thing about like balancing across a supply chain of multiple suppliers and how you hold each other accountable up and down the supply chain, and kind of looking at the total sort of embedded cost of a product.
Right.
Of like how long, I think he called it throughput dollar days was basically like the cost of the product and how many days it is held in a certain facility or held in the process prior to being sold to the end user.
Or delayed
Yeah.
in being shipped to you as the producer from your supplier. And it's sort of, the value times the number of days or number of hours.
Yeah.
Again, I was impressed by his, like taking the time to come up with a metric that accounts for all permutations of, like, it really solves the problem of how do you account for being early, being late, overproducing, underproducing, producing defects, right? Like suddenly you don't need a special category for defects, because if you ship someone a bad defect and it takes them 6 months to pull it from their inventory and then they discover it's bad, that counts against you for all those 6 months. So you best be sure you only ship them good stuff.
Yeah.
Very, very impressive.
Yeah. This kind of leads into my, focus this last week on lead times and cash flow management. And just that I think often as in the common discourse and as business owners, we consider lead times mostly as like a lever for pleasing customers, or a lot of people do. And I've always been aware that there's other things about it that are beneficial of lowering lead times, but it's kind of been like, that's the main thing, is like pleasing customers. They place an order, they get their stuff soon, they're happy. We're in a bit of a cash flow crunch right now because we've been doing a lot of long lead projects, like multiple months. They have a lot of embedded, material cost, labor, like our labor cost is all the same, and it's paid for, we've been paying that the whole time. We're not, there's a lot of post-processing, anodizing, all that stuff. So we're out all of this money and we haven't been paid for it. And that is that's a direct effect of long lead times and things being in your facility for a long time. And so I think it's important to sort of, come back and redefine what lead times mean in a business. Like, it really does mean that you have money tied up in things that you can't use, or like, worse, that you like actually don't have enough money.
Well, I think that's it.
Yeah.
It's tied up.
Right.
It's like,
which is easy to think, it's often like, I think most people, myself included, when they think of like money tied up in inventory, that's like,
Yeah, theoretically,
Yeah.
but it's still, then I'll sell it.
Right. It's like, it's a bummer. Yeah, there's some money tied up there until you're like, oh, that's actually the money that I need to pay my people. Or
Yeah.
that money right there I need right now to pay for my machines.
That's interesting you say that, because I think about that sometimes when I'm explaining lean in our shop.
Yeah.
And I point to our inventory and I'm like, that represents machine time, that represents labor, that represents material costs that I can't use for other things. But it's sort of a theoretical problem for me, because it's like $5,000 and that's not, the bank account has enough in it that's not an issue at all.
Right.
But yeah, it can very quickly become an issue. I've been talking to a bunch of other companies about margin and some other stuff I think we talked about on the podcast. And a lot of people talk about basically like cash being the throttling point of their company.
Yeah.
And I was thinking on it, the reason it's not for me is because of lean. I mean,
Right.
because it's really fast.
Yeah.
And like if I was ordering my stuff from overseas, say in batches of 10,000 pieces or 5,000 pieces, like
It'd be a thing.
it'd be a thing. I produced a bunch of stuff earlier, and I remember we were like, wow, when that company finishes, we're going to be on the hook for like 87 grand.
Yeah.
And I was like, where are we getting 87 grand?
That was in a different product,
Yeah,
different business.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I think for those of us who are small businesses and growing, I'm very guilty of this. And I think it's easy to see a big project and be like, ooh, that's a big dollar amount. Awesome. And at the end of the day, like, it is awesome, but there's these big, pretty substantial hurdles that you have to jump. Like when a much larger company takes on a project of this scale, it's small in the total cash flow of that business. And when a business my size takes on a project like that, it's a significant chunk and it has real effects. So I think it's something that as you grow, you really have to take into account and be pretty strategic about how you handle these moments, because they can be, they could theoretically sink a business.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I think we've sort of been talking about this. There are ways that everyone's amenable to working these things, I think.
Yeah.
That is sort of like smaller batch delivery and stuff like that, where that you get paid. I think, so I've been thinking on this quite a bit, and it was actually nice reading that Goldratt book, because he talked about this. There is this, I think, latent perception in our culture that is a little bit like heavy on sales, where it's like once you ship a thing and you get paid for it, you've won. Instead of like, no, when you ship that thing, the person you ship it to also needs to sell it, and it needs to be all the way through the the supply chain to a customer successfully and happily for everyone to win, including you as the manufacturer. And I just think about that as it pertains to like a partnership between a producer and their suppliers. Right? Like you're a part supplier to them. Mm-hmm. You need them to succeed to order another batch, which is the hope. Yeah. They need you to succeed. Yeah. And like, I think there's just like a missing piece of the conversation often. It's like, oh, I'll get a quote from someone and I hope it's really low. And it's like, you don't hope it's too low, because they're going to get halfway through the project and go belly up, and you're going to be 6 months behind.
Or, I think what is more common is a company quotes something low to get a job. They realize somewhere in the process that they're not making money, and then so they don't do good quality work anymore.
Yeah. And that happens. I've seen that.
Yeah.
Frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just like pissed at you. And then like I called a guy once who it was entirely on him, his mistakes, but I kept asking for third-party testing. Yeah. And at some point he just like yelled at me. He's like, I'm not spending another $1 solving your problems. And it's like, you just promised a spec you couldn't deliver. Like, that's not on me. But yeah.
Right. I think that
didn't help either one of us that we burnt probably 2 or 3 months trying to get to that point. Yeah.
And like the focus on like bottom line cost of a particular product, and the sort of, I think there's often a very not confrontational, but like
adversarial
yeah. Relationship between vendors and customers, or, you know, vendors, clients, and all of that really it pushes things all really in the wrong direction.
I found that it's a perceived adversarial position. Like, I just called someone the other day. I got a quote that I thought was way too high. And I called them and they're like, oh, thanks so much for calling. Like, we never get to talk through our quotes with people.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, awesome. Well, here's where I'm aiming to be. And he was like, here's the problem we're running into. I was like, great. Can we solve that problem? Can I pay for, you know, tooling? Can I, like, anyway.
Yeah.
So cash flow and lead times. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, I have always like erred on the side of trying to be very accommodating to my customers for that reason of trying to be less adversarial and more treating it as like a mutually beneficial arrangement. But I think I kind of shoot myself in the foot sometimes. And I think trying to work out deals with my customers for larger projects where as parts are done, like, for example, this project that we're working on is, I think it's like 12 different part numbers. A bunch of the stuff is done, but we haven't shipped it. So working out deals where as soon as things are done, we ship. And there's lots of benefits there of just like where our shop is clogged with stuff right now. It's kind of hard to move around. So getting cash in quicker as we finish projects. And then on the other end, we're working on ordering material later so that we have less, we're leaning less on our creditors basically.
Right.
And our suppliers, and not putting them in a crunch.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Sort of on this same topic, it's a little bit off topic, but I just had this realization that in customer service, at least in business to business, I think we focus a lot on sort of like the way people talk and what you say and like these kinds of things as being like really key to good customer service.
Okay.
And I had this realization that I think response time overrides all of that. Like, I think you can kind of be a jerk, but if you get back to people, like, to an, you know, maybe not a jerk, but like kind of blunt and short and like,
right.
But if you get back to somebody immediately, I think you will make sales or, you know, be considered as good in customer service. And it's interesting that there is a lot of focus on that, but it's interesting that there's not more focus on that, even as just like, if you're in customer service, you need to be fast. You need to be on the ball with people.
Interesting.
And so looking at customer service as something that has, you know, that you need to QC essentially, focusing on quality and customer service, I sort of think that like that's one place where like speed, response time.
So dollar days. Yeah,
basically. Yeah, you got to increase your throughput on the customer service. So anyway, that was just
interesting.
I was thinking about how we, you know, pair tasks across individuals.
Yep.
And because of that, it doesn't batch well. I think a lot of people want to batch customer service.
Point. Yeah. Right. It's like, I'm not at my computer. I'm in the shop. I'll deal with that at the end of the day or tomorrow morning.
Or even being like, okay, I'm going to do all my emails on Monday and Wednesday or something. And I think that really doesn't work. And I have found through my own experience that quick response is very helpful. And also, like, in the era of email, oftentimes a conversation can, or like getting to some sort of a conclusion can be 6 or 8 emails back.
Right.
And if you were to batch that over a few times a week, that could be several weeks before you've come to something that allows both you and the customer to move forward on a project. Whereas if you're quick about it, it could be an hour and you're done.
I often find with basically everything in business that it's easy to be like, oh, what is like best practice? And honestly, like the best way that I've found to come to like real useful answers is sort of like trying to find an example of when I've experienced the other side.
Yeah.
And I just think about, like, for me, when I'm working on a project, it is top of mind. I really want to move it forward. I want to get it off my plate. And if I fire off 3 emails and one of the people like instantly responds, we can have that conversation live and I can make a decision and check it off my list and be done. Like, give them money. I even have the thought of like, okay, I might be able to find a cheaper thing. Max, it's going to be like $50, $80 cheaper. I mean, depends on the scale of the item.
Yeah.
But it's very rarely worth sort of delaying to get all the quotes, it's like, all right, finished. Yes. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So my thought has been that because that's not a full-time job in our shop, that needs to be something that is combined with other similar type tasks that are flexible sort of in their timing, or not similar tasks, different tasks actually. They need to be paired with tasks that are not time critical. So they can happen any time in a day, so that if you need to take 20 minutes out to have this exchange, you can do that without delaying. So like often shipping's a good thing because it can all happen kind of at the end of the day as long as it happens before the truck arrives. Right. Other things like that.
Do you have someone pick up your stuff?
For the most part, we drop off.
Okay.
That's probably something we should revisit.
I'm thinking I need to revisit that because, it sort of seems like a waste of time. At the beginning, they were going to charge me, I forget how many dollars a day.
Yeah.
And I was like, absolutely not, because sometimes you only have like one package or no packages. Or
this was via USPS?
I forget. It was UPS? A few people. UPS, USPS.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Anyway. I'm going to make a note to revisit that.
Yeah. So another piece I've been thinking about, we sort of talked about off the podcast and thought it would be good to discuss here, is like as the team grows, dealing with quality problems, sort of a different aspect of growth. Like there's the cash flow question. I think like as the team grows, you made the comment of like being nervous about quality, not nervous about quality, but like there is a question about how to maintain quality when you don't know that you've touched every part.
Yeah.
And I think I am having the same thing of like, for the first time over the past few months, product shipped that I've barely touched.
Yeah.
Which is the goal and awesome. Well, I guess Goldratt would say that's profit is the goal. But yeah, like in terms of scaling, that is really key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, I think we talked about this briefly. I haven't fully fleshed this out in my head, but I think like I've been working a lot on these like information flow systems for job like preparation and setup and starting to run. I think that is relatively simple. I mean, it's complicated, but it's in the grand scheme relatively simple to enact because it's mostly a one-way kind of flow. And when you try and build a system for QC or QA, you're dealing with a lot of feedback loops.
Right.
And also the, like, how do I say this? When someone's setting up a job, like they can't start unless they've gotten all the information. So it's like kind of built in that you have good compliance. I mean, hopefully, unless they're just hitting the green button without having done anything. But that's pretty obvious very quickly that it didn't work.
Yeah.
With QC and QA, like you have to be much more, an operator or an individual has to be much more intentional about compliance. And because it's very easy to just kind of like, in our case, run parts, not check them, and then find out at the end that they're bad. And also like the feedback loops, if there was a problem, are extremely disruptive. So it's almost like there is some like subconscious incentive not to.
Totally.
So I think it's an interesting thing that, you know, we're going to have to start tackling soon, of how to build in these systems in a way that you get good, the word compliance I'm not loving, but good buy-in essentially. And it is sort of compliance, but you need more than just compliance. You need like people who are actively involved in and invested in it succeeding.
Yeah.
And you need a system that's easy for them to do that.
Right.
And that building that seems a little more complicated than building good workflows for like handing off different aspects of a project.
Yeah. So a few things that like I've read about / found useful, I think, not that I'm an expert in any way on this, but like in sort of, like lately we've been talking a lot about QC. And I think the thing I kind of realized last week is that I've been thinking about QC as sort of this separate piece that is almost disrupting production.
Sure.
Rather than another step that the parts must flow through.
Yeah.
Like, so I've almost been thinking at our mill, we pass parts from our mill to our tumbler.
Yeah.
We have a queue, like a buffer at our tumbler.
Yeah.
Because timing and time are not the same thing. It is a bottleneck, but not over 24 hours, only over like 8 hours.
Yeah.
It's like we always get everything through the tumbler, but
Yeah.
it builds up a buffer there. I've been thinking about adding another table that parts don't move into the buffer before they've been QC'd.
Yeah.
And that it is like an explicit part of production is moving it through that station. Like
Yeah.
it's not just something we try to do and maybe do when things are either going very smoothly and we have extra time, or going very poorly and we know we need to do QC checks.
I haven't had a similar thought. I'm not quite sure how to enact it for us yet, because our part size and like stuff and
where
quantity
they go
and where they go can vary so much. But I think using that sort of lens for viewing it is probably going to be the only way forward.
Yeah.
In that you have to make it an explicit part of the production system, not as an extra check that has to be done.
Right. And to your point about feedback loops, there's a book by Shigeo Shingo called Zero Quality Control.
Yeah.
And it relates to it relates to statistical quality control, which was sort of a big revolution in manufacturing. It sort of gets to like Six Sigma, is like sort of applying statistics to quality. But as Shigeo pointed out, statistics are nice, but facts are nicer. And so the point there is that statistically, it can be very unlikely that you have a reject or a bad part, but that doesn't change the customer's experience if they receive a bad part.
Yeah.
So unless you get to 100% QC, there's a chance that something bad ships. But anyway, there's a challenges in implementing that around cost that come down to like subsequent checks and building Pocoyoke fixtures. But
if you're in a high mix environment, the building Pocoyoke fixtures sort of becomes a non-starter.
Yes and no. The no part being that I think we've touched on. There is a feeling that I keep coming back to this. When there's a system that's very efficient, like mass production, like in-station efficient, right? Yeah. Very productive, I should say. It makes tons of stuff. When there's an issue and you have a bad day of production and you scrap a ton of stuff and you eat a whole day making bad stuff or realizing you made a pile of bad stuff, I think there's a tendency to categorize that in your mind as an exception, as something that, it went wrong. That's not how it's meant to work. Instead of like, yes, but that is how it works.
Right.
And so you can take all that time to amortize it over your parts and increase your cycle times accordingly.
Yeah.
And still be ahead.
I just meant more of like in a job shop environment when you get a part that you made. I mean, we do Pocoyoke in like soft jaws and stuff like that,
but
not for like defining not making fixed gauging for every part that
I could imagine scenarios where doing in-cycle probing for critical features to know that nothing comes out of the machine that doesn't comply, because what I was going to say is like doing QC immediately after a part comes out of a machine instead of waiting like it gets queued up in the QC department and then they get QC'd. Like the shorter those feedback loops can be, the fewer rejects you are likely to make before something gets caught. And then the other thing is like subsequent checks. there's an idea of like subsequent checks and in-station quality where nothing gets passed that is not doesn't comply. So something we've been trying to do unsuccessfully so far, for the most part, is subsequent checks shouldn't be done by the same person who did the work.
Yeah, it's hard when there's only maybe one of you in the shop.
It's not only that, like Sam has been doing most of production, and so he'll do all the sewing, and then theoretically I should do the shipping because then I get to touch all of those parts and check them as they go out the shop.
Yeah.
There's just like, he knows how to do the shipping. I have a lot of other things I quote unquote need to do that he doesn't know how to do. So we've been sort of wrestling with that. It's like, right. I should check it. One thing we've found that is maybe not a happy medium, but a stopgap is if, and I hate to say this because it relies on batching.
Yeah.
Is that there seems to sort of remove you a little bit from the immediacy of having just done the work. So if he does a few orders and then goes to the shipping station and checks a few orders, he's forgotten
which one was which.
A little bit. Yeah. So it's not like, oh, you misread the same thing twice in the same way because you did it 10 seconds apart. It's like, okay, it's 10 minutes apart. And
that's actually, probably a reasonable stopgap, and maybe even like, maybe not the long term, but it might, I guess also there's like coming back to like the proof's in the pudding. And,
right.
It's great to have this like theoretical idea that, people shouldn't be checking their own work. But if you can figure out a way to make it effective, that when people do check their own work, then it's fine.
Yeah. And I think it's different as a small, best practice. Sure. If you have a huge factory with a person at every single station, I could see implementing that.
Yeah.
But for us, it is, that simultaneously, I just always hate to kind of let myself off the hook.
Last little piece on QC, maybe. I had this idea for, as part of our job management, because it can be both ways detrimental to have a completely standard QC strategy. Yeah. Right. Like if there's parts that legitimately don't need it, you're overworking things. Right. What's the lean waste?
Overprocessing.
Overprocessing. Simultaneously, if you're not checking parts that need a lot of checks, that's very detrimental because you're probably producing defects. So I've been thinking about maybe having just like a 3-level tier that we can assign to different part numbers. And that's like, this is a 1, 2, or 3, like check accordingly. Or like not check accordingly, but like have a QC, like SOP basically. That's like, if it's a 1, check every 10th part and only these, only the critical features on the print. If it's a 2, check every 5. It's a 3, check every piece or something like that. I see what you're saying. So that it's an easy way to like just kind of highlight to the operators and employees what level, basically like in our shop we have, because we've done a lot of like more loose tolerance work, things that have a couple key features and then it's primarily about aesthetics. Yeah. We often really prioritize, speed and keeping things moving. Mm-hmm. And it's easy for that to just become sort of the de facto status of the shop. And so I think it would be good to have a simple way that employees can say, oh, this is a 3 on this one. We can't prioritize speed over other things. Like QC has to be the priority on these parts.
My feeling hearing you say that is like, I'm not sure what the purpose of it seems like there's 2 things happening. One is what needs to get checked, and the other is frequency. What percentage needs to get checked. Yeah. And I wonder if that would just be simpler nomenclature, like it's 1 in 10 or 1 in 1 or 1 in 100. And I guess that would be like a numerical thing. And the other piece would then, it needs to go, that it needs to go into a QC process, and maybe each piece has a simple call out unless it's really
Yeah, I mean,
defined?
I think the other aspect that, at least in our work that we do right now, is just a level of attentiveness where there's a lot of parts that we do right now that if they're set up properly at the beginning,
Yeah.
and nothing looks wrong because of the precision of of the machines that we both run. If nothing looks wrong while you're running it, like visually, if you pick it up and you're like, nice, another nice part, like it's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, it will be fine.
Right.
And that is one level of attentiveness.
Yeah.
And then there's other parts where the precision is beyond what you can easily sort of see by just the overall status of like, are the finishes okay? Are things blending all right? I don't see anything weird in the machine. And maybe that's really the kind of the delineation we need to make, is like, this goes from having checked the first several parts to make sure that things were running consistently. And from that point on, you basically prioritize speed and just getting the parts done.
Right.
To, no, these are parts where you have to like stop and check and measure on a regular basis.
Yeah. So another piece we found, and timing wise, we should wrap this up, was just like another piece that we've struggled with, I should say, is checking parts, and then you check them frequently, and then it's like, wow, they're good. Okay, like we don't need to check them as much anymore. And it's like, tools wear over time. Fixtures break down over time. Like, and picking a good regimen and then sticking to that as again, like coming back to that, like this is a step in the process, and we have defined ahead of time how we do that,
right?
How many we do it on, all of that is, I feel like important, and I don't know,
it's key.
Trying to figure it out.
Yeah, cool. Well, does that pretty much wraps up for today? Anything last you want to hit on?
Yeah, I think that's kind of it. I guess the last piece I would hit on QC. That's we talked about this early days. I forget if it was on the podcast. Anyway, again, if you're making rejects, analyze that time of both machining the reject, checking the reject, finding the reject, eliminating that reject, and amortize that time over your production to eliminate the reject. And overall, that's a cheaper process to run. And I think this gets back to like cost accounting. We did that with paint, where I was so intent on getting our cycle times on paint down that we had massive rejects, and I kept doing the same like fast paint. And then I realized, wait, I can just do the QC ahead of baking it in the oven. That makes it permanent to eliminate a lot of our rejects. And we did eliminate a lot of our rejects. And it took more time in the painting process, which looked bad on our spreadsheet.
Right.
But it took less time overall.
Yeah.
So, I think this is the rationalize your production side of things.
Yeah.
That lean books talk a lot about.
Yeah. Oh, I got one last closing statement, which is maybe obvious, but in the business to business world, the best time to start a business relationship is 6 months ago. The next best time is today.
Isn't there a tree quote to that?
Yeah,
I like it.
I just stole the tree quote, but I think it's true.
Because both take a while to grow.
They take a long time to grow. There's high stakes for business relationships, much more than retail relationships. If you go buy a pair of pants, you're not like, you might not buy another one if you don't like them, but you're not going to be like real pissed and sending emails probably
it's not going to sink your business,
and it's not going to sink your business. So
that's a good call.
Business relationships are slow to grow, slow to flower and fruit, so start them before you need them.
And on that note, you can find me on Instagram at austere_manufacturing.
You can find me on Instagram at lichen_MFG on Instagram.
And the podcast at Incremental CI. We love hearing from folks. And please do leave reviews on the podcast where you listen to it. It allegedly helps our ratings. No, it does help people find us and get more people involved in this conversation. We've already started having some really interesting people reach out and really help us inform the conversation from real world experience.
Yeah.
DFM Toolworks, shout out.
all the nuggets.
has worked at Toyota.
Yes.
And gives us like, oh yes, but here's actually how they do it when the rubber meets the road. We try to kind of share some of that, but yeah. Anyway, the more people we can get involved in this conversation, I feel like we can all kind of grow together and move things forward. So yeah, spread the word, leave a review, all that.
We'll talk to y'all soon.